How's it going, guys? Welcome to episode 3 of Binging on Broadcast. A much anticipated episode, I'd like to think anyway, because today we're going to be talking about the snare drum, more specifically the snare top. Okay? We all know snare drum is just one of those elusive things that can never just sound the way you want it to sound. You always struggle with it. There's memes for days on this subject, okay? And it's true. It's hard. Snares are hard. They're one of the hardest things to get right. And unfortunately, they're also one of few tracks that can really make or break a mix, okay? You could have the best sounding mix in the world, but if your snare drum is questionable, the whole mix all of a sudden becomes questionable, okay? It can really, really set the pace and set the vibe of your mix, okay? So getting this right is really, really important, okay? All right. Now, before we jump into processing, all right, we need to look at the source of the snare drum, meaning the snare drum itself, okay? And more importantly, the tuning of the snare drum, all right? That is a huge part of your snare drum tone. It's everything, okay? So if you're not taking the time to get your snare drum tone and tuning correct, then how do you expect any plugin or any processing to make it good if the source isn't good, okay? Get it at the source. All right. So the first thing I do when recording or mixing a snare drum is I sit down at the drum set, I get my little tuning key out, and I start tuning the thing. Okay. Now, there's a million different directions you can go with tuning, and everybody has a different opinion on this. I'm not saying what I do is right or the most right or the correct way to do it. It's a way. Okay. I will say in worship, for the most part, this gives me a good result more often, okay? So I kind of lean into that a little bit, all right? When I'm getting drum sounds for worship, the snare is usually a thicker, thuddier, fat kind of snare, okay? It's not a tight, smacky, poppy kind of snare, all right? This is, again, not the golden rule. It's my rule, okay? And I've gotten some pretty decent results from it, I feel like. Okay, so when I tune that drum, I'm usually detuning it because I'm going for that thicker, thuddier sound. I usually get it down to like 3/4 of a turn away from that lug, just being loose, and you can jiggle it. It's so loose, okay? Not much further from that. So it's loose. It is, it is thuddy, all right? Obviously do the obvious things, like get all the lugs, even tension all the way around. And then the second thing with tuning is deadening, all right? You can use gels to deaden that drum, or they make little clip-on leather straps that sit on the side and kind of just lay a piece of leather on the snare drum. That does a really good job. I've seen people put their wallets on snare drums. You can use some gaff tape and Kleenex, do the same thing. It's kind of janky, but it does work. All right, so whatever you got to do, deaden it. That'll really help. Now, you'll get 2 complaints from a detuned snare drum from the drummer. The first one is they're going to hate playing on a detuned snare. There's no response. It's not fun or inspirational to play on. All right, so they're not going to be happy about that. But when they hear it, they will be happy about it. Okay, it'll sound really good, really fat and huge to them. All right, and then the second complaint is because we've detuned that snare drum so far down, where those lugs are just barely grabbing on. During a song, throughout the service, there will be lugs that completely loosen to the point of they're just jiggling. There's no tension on them. Okay, so there's, you're going to have to work with your drummers to get them to kind of keep an eye on that and keep it tuned up. Not like tight, not like crank it down, but keep it tuned up to so they're not completely loose. And, or you can get lug locks. They make them in various different shapes and sizes to help keep those lugs, keep that tension consistent. All right. However, there's nothing perfect. Your lugs will drift. They will loosen up. So you're going to have to just be proactive with it. And you should be proactive anyway with the drum tuning. Before every service I ever mix, I'm down there tuning drums, getting them popping nice and good. And sometimes even between like services. So if we have 2 different services on a single day, I'll go down and tune in between because they do drift. Don't expect that your drums are like, all right, I'll do a one-time tune and it'll be good for the rest of the year. No, it'll be good for a song. I usually notice drifting within a song. So you just have to be proactive with it and keep up on it. Okay. All right. With all that said, let's dive in. Okay. So this is a snare top mic with a detuned snare with no processing. Okay. Pretty raw. Nothing special about this. There is, it's not shiny. It's not pretty. It's kind of weird, wonky sounding, right? That's okay. We haven't done anything to it. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is when I hear this snare drum, it has that boxy frequency area. Okay. I want to get rid of that. You'll find that's a really common thing that you'll find, that box area. You're constantly cutting out that box. Okay. So I'm going to pull up an EQ, and we all love stock EQs because it's not about the EQ you use. It's about how you use it. Something like that. There's probably a song that says that exact thing, and it's very important. Okay, so boxiness, that's going to be around your 300, 400, 500-ish area. Yeah, kind of right in there. So that's 400 even, 400.6. Okay, and yeah, cut 5 dB at 400. All right. Next thing I'm going to look at is the fun part of the snare, the girth, the fatness, the power, the beef of the snare drum. All right. It's going to be around your 100 to 200 range, anywhere in there. Oh yeah. So that's 120. Yeah, somewhere in there. That's the fatness, the thickness. Cool, somewhere in there. Okay, so we pulled out some of the boxiness. We've added some of the girth. Now let's take a look at the high end. Thus far, this snare still sounds pretty dark and pretty uninspirational. Okay, there's no clarity, there's no shimmer. We're about to address that. Okay, I'm just going to grab a shelf at like 4K and above. Oh, yeah. Cleaned it right up. Cool. That's kind of the clarity, okay? A lot of people think that the high end from a snare drum comes from the snare bottom mic. Snare bottom mic is the worst sounding mic, I think, in existence. Might be worse than the hi-hat, although the hi-hat's pretty bad. Okay? No, I don't get my high end from the snare bottom hardly at all. Most of it's coming from the snare top, okay? So even though out of the gate, it's a relatively dark sounding mic, when you start adding that high end in there, it's like, ooh, wow. You get clarity. It's not this weird, wonky, slappy snare bottom high end. It's just a clean, kind of thwacky. Now, you want to be careful with this though, because usually there's a lot of hi-hat bleed in a snare mic and a snare top mic. So as I bring up high end, I will be bringing high end up of the hi-hat as well. So you kind of have to find that happy medium of what's good for the snare and not, crazy on the hi-hat. Cool. That's really good. Now, the next high end is a little bit further down. This is what's going to give the snare some attitude. It's going to take a blank clone of a thuddy snare and give it a name. We'll call our snare drum Sebastian. Okay, this frequency makes my snare drum have a name. In this case, we're going to call our buddy snare Sebastian. Oh, hi, Sebastian. Yeah, you got a little attitude there, don't you? That's that attitude area. Not a lot of Sebastian. Nobody needs a lot of Sebastian, just a little Sebastian. Everybody could use a little Sebastian in your life. You know what I mean? Okay. That's it. So here's without EQ. And with. Cool. Now, the next step, this is if I choose to do this is where I'd add a gate. However, I'm not going to add a gate because the bleed in this situation is just not that big of a deal. Okay, even he's bashing cymbals in here, even if I go to a spot where he's playing hi-hat. Over here, I think he is. I mean, there's hi-hat in there, obviously, but it's just not that offensive at all. So I just don't see a need to gate this snare drum at all. Don't add a gate just because you think you should add a gate or because you've seen people add gates to snare drums. Really, analyze it. Is the bleed that's on this snare mic so much of an issue that I have to add a gate? If it is, sure, go nuts. Okay. In this situation, it's not. So I'm choosing not to add a gate. I don't need to. Okay. It's one less thing destroying my signal. Look, if you look at the plugins like a problem, you're going to use them better and use them less. Okay. Think of every plugin you add like a cancer to your signal. Okay. So every plugin you add onto it, you're just giving it a little more cancer. You're just kind of dwindling that signal down further and further. Okay. So try to use less, but just use the ones you do use better. Okay. So no gate in this situation. And with that, we are done with snare top. This is literally all I do to a snare top mic. I throw some EQ on there, EQ it well, but most importantly, I tune the drum well. Okay, that is huge. I can't stress that enough. It allows me to only add an EQ, a stock EQ at that. Okay, there's nothing fancy here. Pretty broad curves on my EQ too. Okay, don't overcomplicate these things. It's not about your super unique and special plug-in chain that makes the snare drum magical that nobody knows the way I'm routing in my chain. No. It's good old-fashioned hard work and good old-fashioned drum tuning and good old-fashioned just getting it right at the source. Okay? That is what it's all about. Okay? Now, in the next few episodes, or the next episode, I'll touch on snare bottom, which, let's be honest, it'll be brief because nobody likes a snare bottom mic. It's just terrible sounding, but I will sneak it in a little bit. And then more importantly, the snare bus processing. Okay. That's where we'll start getting into adding compression, a little more EQ and effects. A big part of the snare drum is those effects, especially in worship. Okay. So stay tuned. Next episode is a big one. Snare bottom. So, with all that being said, hope you guys enjoyed this. Snare top is a relatively simple thing. It doesn't have to be complicated. Don't feel like you have to add this fancy routing scheme of plugins to make a snare pop. No, you have to make a good sounding snare. Just let that sound good. That's all you have to do. That was weird. Make a good sounding snare, or let a good sounding snare sound good. That's right. I'm sticking to it. Okay. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Stay tuned. Next one, we'll continue further on the snare drum. Like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you.
Sorry, I wasn't able to share that for you.
Well, at least I know my own phone isn't even a fan of binging on broadcast. Well, thanks, Siri, for nothing. With that, Star Swipe out.